Hey there, horror fans! Welcome to episode 93 of Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorDNA.com. I am your host, James Ferguson. You know, sooner or later I'm going to get to episode 100, guys. It's just taking a little while longer than I thought. Anyway, this week's guest is Joey Weiser, the creator of Ghost Hog, coming in May from Oni Press. I know you're not supposed to judge books by their cover, but how can you go wrong with a title like that? This is an all-ages original graphic novel about, well, a ghost hog. There's a lot more to it than that, and that's kind of the whole reason for this show, because I talked to Joey about it. It's pretty cool. Anyway, if you want to try out Ghost Hog before buying it, you can check out a completely original story in the Oni Press Free Comic Book Day issue on May 4th. Try that out, then come back on May 8th to pick up the graphic novel with entirely different material. Joey can be found online on Twitter as @JoeyWeiser, on Instagram as @JoeyWeiserComics, and his official website, tragic-planet.com. Alright, that's it for the intro this week. Now let's dig right into episode 93 of Funny Book Splatter with my guest, Joey Weiser. Alright, so, Ghost Hog. Tell me about Ghost Hog. How would you describe this book to somebody?
Ghost Hog is a graphic novel aimed at young readers, but hopefully enjoyable for all ages. And it's about Truff, who's the ghost of a young boar who haunts the spot where she was shot down by a hunter and is sort of, I'd say, kind of grappling with obsession towards him about getting vengeance. And then she encounters forest spirits and mountain demons, and it's a comedic adventure story with a bit of a dark concept just by virtue of the fact that the main character's dead, right?
Yeah. And I like how you kind of show it at first in that it's like, you don't necessarily know exactly what's going on, and then like all of a sudden this like fiery ghost shows up, or she gets mad, and that's when the ghost side comes out, and you're like, whoa, where did this come from?
Yeah. And that was fun to sort of like figure out how to do that, to sort of show her in her sort of regular state with maybe like a sort of the faintest blue glow, and then every once in a while it kind of increases and increases until she turns into this more frightening spectral form. Yeah,
like how did that kind of design come together? Because it's funny, like you have a really like welcoming, approachable art style, and then there's like, it just like it, when you get that ghost element in it, it's not like terrifying, but it's very, it's a little creepy. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like it's something like the more spookier versions of like the things I remember from like the real Ghostbusters cartoon, where it's like,
okay,
you know, that kind of thing where it's like, oh, like there's something, it's strange. It looks like it's almost like made out of like blue fire, and it's just like, it's all out there. It's like, this looks, it's that like, you know, just that push into the scary element that I like a lot. So it's not too scary. It's not going to give a kid nightmares, but like, there are some pretty cool, creepy sides to it.
Well, that probably reflects my tastes, to some extent, just because like, I'd say I'm a person who likes this sort of like I love monsters, and I love like the inventiveness of horror stuff, but I don't actually like being scared. So like my favorite horror like movies are the ones that are typically older movies that have like really cool visual stuff. Like I'd say my favorite horror movie is the Japanese movie House, just because it's not necessarily scary, but it's like very fun and interesting and kind of creepy in that same way. It makes you feel a little like, ooh, that's when you start thinking about it a little more, it makes you feel more creeped out than when you're actually watching it and you're like, whoa, this is just weird and interesting to watch. And I definitely did grow up in the 80s and early 90s watching this sort of real Ghostbusters era cartoons and things, so that probably did rub off on me. That's funny that I hadn't thought about that, but that's definitely, you know, I was a big fan of the Ecto Cooler and whatnot.
Yeah. But yeah, it's funny how that kind of stuff can seep in, but you're not alone, I think, in that having that weird feeling of like, I like horror, but I don't want to be scared by it. It's like this weird, or it's a weird thing that I think a lot of fans of the genre have, where it's like, it's not a love-hate relationship, but it's this thing where like, you know, you got me kind of thing. So
Yeah, totally. And I have a lot of friends that are big horror fans, and I have to sort of pick and choose what I watch with them, because occasionally I'll be like, yeah, I can stomach that, and then I'll be like messed up for weeks being like, ugh. And weirdly enough, one of the things that really does scare me is ghosts. Like, that's one of those things that I can kind of convince myself late at night might be real, and so it's kind of funny that I ended up taking on a ghost story myself.
So getting back to like kind of the talking animal side of it. So like it's interesting that there's a you have the talking anthropomorphic animals, but then there's also human hunters in this. So it creates that kind of interesting dynamic. I mean, I guess it's like the side of the Lion King that no one really talks about. The fact that the lions would eat those gazelles and zebras and stuff like that, but like no, they're all friends right now. So like, I guess it's interesting to me seeing how like you have the hunter and you get to see a little bit of that perspective. I won't spoil anything here, but I guess why have those kind of two worlds together, having the human side and an anthropomorphic talking animal side?
Yeah, it came just, I guess, partially out of the concept of kind of being like, I Ghost Hog came from just like a doodle and a sketchbook of a ghost pig and being kind of like, what could this be? And then the story kind of comes just from answering little questions like, well, how did she die? And all these things. And then I think the aspect, I am already starting to see some responses that I wouldn't say I'm surprised by, that are people being like, I like the book, but it's kind of weird that like the main character got eaten, but it's supposed to be a fun, cute story. And I want you to sort of grapple with that. Like I don't want to like lean super hard pro or negative about like eating meat or vegetarianism or anything like that. I eat meat, but I do like the idea that it would maybe make especially young readers kind of confront the idea that they have to eat these living things if they eat meat, and make up their own minds about how they feel about that,
Yeah. So there is like I don't want to say like message kind of thing. It's not like beating you over the head with like hunting is wrong. These animals have feelings, but you could see how someone could pull that out from the thing. But and that's just one facet of it. I didn't mean to like harp on that, but I mean like you have demons or this ridiculous creature stuck in the mountain that I absolutely love, and the forest spirits and stuff like that. So it's like you get this wide variety in here. It's just, well, Ghost Hog is the first piece of it, and then you just kind of stumble into this whole huge world that's going on just underneath the surface. So like it's funny thinking of it from the hunter's perspective, and like he's like, I don't know, I needed food. I went out and I killed this pig and my family ate. And now it's like, but in reality, like when you dig a little bit deeper, like the guy has no idea there's this giant demon in a mountain, and there's all these spirits and all these other creatures and villages and stuff lurking around in that forest. If he just like went a little bit deeper and looked a little bit harder, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't, I don't explore like a human character interacting with the animals, but I guess in my mind they wouldn't be able to hear the animals speaking like their same spoken language and things like that, but they do wear little clothes and stuff, so
yeah, so I guess that's kind of like the weird line. Like, yeah, if you saw this, the Truff walking around in like in her adorable little outfit there, like with a completely like a scarf and everything too. It's like very fashionable. It's like you think, well, maybe I shouldn't kill this hog. Like,
yeah, but who knows? Maybe in this world, what the humans see is just what we see when we see a pig, a boar. We don't see clothes on them, but maybe kind of in their world they see clothes on each other or something like that. It's those. I like to leave a lot of open ended things, because I liked this sort of idea of creating a thing that kind of feels like a folk tale, that feels kind of like an adaptation of an old story, but like maybe you've never heard the story before, or maybe it comes from another culture or something. That's something I was kind of playing around with when making this story. I think you
definitely get that with the way that the book starts, and having like this like two kids kind of talking about the legend of the Ghost Hog. Like it's a great way to kind of get you in there and be like, wait, what is that story? Have I heard this urban legend before? And it instantly kind of gets you an idea of what you're getting in for. But it's it's a little more on like the softer side of it. So you're not like it's not that thing with finding a bloody hook on a car door, but it's something a little more out there.
Yeah. It's, and it does start with a slightly kind of scarier tone. You hear them kind of talking in hushed words, and the first sort of glimpse you see of the Ghost Hog is sort of this imagined version with these like really gross, drooly teeth and stuff like that. So I did try to like kind of pump up a little bit of the scariness at the beginning, but still, didn't go too far with it, I don't think.
I think your style works really well for it in that all ages flair to it. So it's like I said before, it's not something that's going to give your kid nightmares, but it'll scratch that like monster itch for them, because there's all kinds of creepy, cool stuff in here, not just on the ghost element, but like I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the demon's name that lives in the mountain there, but Mava. I love the design for this guy, because he just looks like this like big fat lazy kind of guy. Like he's just like supremely powerful. Like what gets me are the fingernails. Like the detail of the fingernails, how showing that they're all just like beat up and just like nasty. And like, oh, like everything about this guy is just gross. He's like drooling. Like, oh, even the toenails are like, ugh. But like you can see like how he's like, all right, he's the bad guy in this thing, but just like his whole presence is just like, ugh.
Yeah, totally. Thanks. That's good to hear. Yeah, I think there's some sort of like low key body horror in that, where I'm just kind of like expressing things, maybe even about myself, that's like a little uncomfortable, like those things, especially when you're a kid. Like grown-ups are these kind of big, hairy, scary people with facial hair and gross fingernails and big horns growing out of the sides of their heads, right?
Yeah, it's like the fingernails are really what gets you, because like even just looking at it, like God, like just one clip, just fix that so much, like that's gonna drive me crazy. Yeah,
he's got all that like rock around him. Surely he could make a file or something.
And it is funny how like it's Truff's journey kind of takes us along the way. Like she does come away from the hunter. She does kind of pop up and in Mava's story, and how all these things kind of intersect. So like at first you kind of look at all these different pieces, and between her story and the hunter and the forest spirits and even like the human village that's talking about the legend of the Ghost Hog, like it's like, how do all these things connect? And then as you go along, you're starting to like put all these pieces together and see how there is a world there. And I think, like you said, there's the possibility for a lot of stories presents itself in this. So whether you're just asking about like, well, if this is one thing, like I think you explore this in the Free Comic Book Day issue of like, well, if she's a ghost, are there other ghosts like of other animals like that? And that's like an interesting dynamic. Like, yeah, like what is this entire forest haunted by the ghosts of every animal that has passed away there? And it presents this kind of like interesting dynamic there about not only the idea of ghosts, but I think like vengeance and this kind of like why someone would come back or stick around after they've died.
Yeah, the Free Comic Book Day issue has like two short stories that I created after I had written the book. And one was drawn like kind of at the beginning of the book, and one was drawn more towards the end. And like, I definitely was created to kind of explore ideas that are in the book that don't get quite enough time, just by virtue of them not really fitting in with the story, but things that I was thinking about the whole time I was making it, kind of the rules of how haunting works and thinking about things like that and those themes of haunting and obsession and stuff. And then kind of the idea of like, what other kinds of like fantasy creatures and monsters and stuff would be in this world. And that's where you get that water lion from the second story.
Yeah, that was a pretty creepy thing too, because he basically just like pops up and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna eat everything. Like it's a pretty like weird, like he has these weird dead eyes to him that stick out a little bit.
Yeah, my editor was a little surprised by it. So I had originally just created those two short stories innately, and I threw them in a mini comic, and I had sent it to my editor, and she was like, wow, this is actually a little darker than the tone of the book itself. And then when they asked me to color it and put it together for the Free Comic Book Day issue, I was like, are you sure it's okay if you feel like that's maybe a little bit misrepresentative of the tone? And my editor was like, "Nah, it's great. It'll still give people the idea." And she was kind of like, "And maybe we'll make some kids scared. That'll be fun."
Yeah, so. Like I think like what I've seen a lot of is like, this is gonna sound like so stupid and old, but like, like we don't scare kids anymore. Like, yeah, like, it's not like we're just like jumping out and like waving a machete at a child, but I grew up with things like Goosebumps and stuff like that, where it's like, yeah, I liked that stuff, and I don't think that we give kids credit enough when it comes to horror and being scared, and like that's okay to do that. It's how like people grapple with fears and things like that. So like it's okay to deal with this thing. Like I don't expect someone to like buy this book and have to then like explain to a child the concept of death and like what happens and things like that. There's nuance to it.
Yeah, there had been a little discussion between my editor and I about that kind of thing, about possibly even putting like a little like lesson guide type thing in the back to talk about like how you could talk about some of these themes with your kids and stuff. And then eventually we were just kind of like, nah, you know what, let the book stand on its own. It's fine. And that's, I had those same feelings when I was writing it. Like, is this a little too much to have like the main character like grappling like literally with the fact that she's been eaten, and I had the same conclusion that you did. That I was like, I watched a lot of stuff that was kind of like seemed too scary for me when I was a kid, but kind of looking back, it's maybe a little more gentle than I thought when I was a kid, and I kind of wanted it to be along those lines that, it's, not a R-rated horror movie or anything, but it's still, doesn't shy away from things just because it's for kids.
There's that middle ground, and I think like having that, I think it also becomes very formative for kids, because it's like getting that kind of introductory to it. Like I've seen that there's this like the middle grade or all ages kids kind of horror is this like vast empty space. There's like really nothing there, like, and it's disappointing, because it's like, again, growing up with things like Goosebumps, like that was the thing, and it's like, having that as like such a formative time in my life is so it allows you to fall in love with with like monsters and scary stuff and all that other thing, and we don't really have that. Like, kids stuff is unfortunately kind of, and I say that with two kids of my own, seeing what's out there, a lot of it has kind of just been like dumbed down and watered down to such an extent. So having stuff that can address it without, that parents aren't like tearing their hair out of like, man, if I have to watch another episode of Boss Baby, I don't know what I'm gonna do, But there's a spot for it.
All this talk about Goosebumps, it's making me remember that like I was totally a wimpy kid. Like I was very scared of stuff, and I was too scared to read Goosebumps, but I would hear all about them through kids doing book reports, and I always remember being very fascinated, especially Say Cheese and Die as like very evocative to me, and I would like that cover with the family doing a barbecue, but they're all skeletons, like stuck with me, even though I never have actually read the book.
Yeah, see, like that's the kind of stuff that it can stick with you. Like I still have I'm sure I'm not the only one, but like a really crazy fear about ventriloquist dummies because of the Night of the Living Dummy Goosebumps book, and I think there was an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode too. But like these things that it's like that like sticks with me, that like there's something about them that is so freaking unsettling that I just can't handle it.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, like I think there's this kind of spot here, and I think this, reading this as an adult, like it's easy to get pulled into this kind of to Ghost Hog without having that thing of like, oh my god, this is so like watered down or something like that. It is a fun book. Like that's the thing. Like yes, it deals with a main character who is literally dead and she has to grapple with her own death, but there's some fun to it and how it's addressed and how we deal with it.
Great, that's awesome. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah, that's kind of the goal there. So I guess outside of something like House that you mentioned before, and we know it wasn't Goosebumps, but was there anything else in that kind of genre that kind of like I'm trying to like trace the the path back. Like how did we get to something like that started with a sketch of a ghost pig? Like how what is it about ghosts or something like that kind of got you into starting to work on Ghost Hog?
Well, this isn't as far back as childhood, but I've been very, very into the work of Shigeru Mizuki, the Kitaro books, that the manga books that Drawn and Quarterly's been putting out. I've been really fascinated with his work. And it is that same kind of thing where it's like ghost stories, but they're not. Sometimes they're scary, sometimes they're not, and they're really interesting. And I like a lot of these sort of like darker edged stuff that's maybe not super scary, like Drew Wang's Margot Malou and those Hilda books that Luke Pearson put out are have sort of a spooky edge to them as well, and that's the kind of thing that like makes me really excited because I do love these monster stuff, and I do love, like, I grew up being super into like Godzilla and kind of cheesier monster movies like the sort of Mystery Science Theater type, Creature from the Black Lagoon and things like that. But yeah, but yeah, definitely the ghost thing like is the thing that I've just never been completely able to shake a real fear of. So, I think as a kid, it was seeing like Are You Afraid of the Dark? And then kind of a little bit later stuff like X-Files and all that sort of paranormal stuff that was really big in the 90s, where I'd sort of be able to convince myself that maybe there were aliens outside my window and things like that. But yeah, it's when I was doodling Ghost Hog, I was just kind of drawing lots of things in my sketchbook without really thinking about it too much. It was at a time when I was still working on my previous series, Merman, and I was even at that time, that was when I first started that, and I was pitching it, and I wasn't sure if I was going to find a publisher, and I drew this Ghost Hog almost just sort of, totally absentmindedly, and I was like, this is really neat. I like this character, and I drew them a few more times, but then once I started working on Merman, it was like, well, I got to put this aside because if I think about this too much, this is all I want to do.
Yeah, you get distracted with it. And then it's tough to explain a ghost pig in Merman, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely wanted it to be. So Merman is about a fish boy that's kind of washes up on the beach and is found by these human kids that take him to school and stuff. And it's very much set in our like modern world, but then there's this sort of secret fish world underwater, like fish people kind of inspired by the Creature from the Black Lagoon and things like that. But with Ghost Hog, I really wanted to break free of that and just create a completely fantasy world. So it's a little different in that way. Like I couldn't see the two characters interacting unless I made a sort of like more ancient fantasy version of Merman or something like that.
No, it's great. One thing I'm always curious as a writer and an artist, how do you approach a full graphic novel like this? Do you write out a script, or since it sounds like you started with kind of doodling and making designs, it sounds like from the origins of the story, but how do you actually get it and get it into this kind of final form here?
Yeah, I don't write like full scripts like some people write comic book scripts that's somewhat similar to movie scripts where it's all text and it says, page 1, panel 1, this happens. But because I feel like I tried that and I spend so much time picturing the page and imagining the page and trying to figure out how much would fit on how many panels would fit here and there, that I might as well just sketch it out. But then just starting from the drawing, like that kind of takes a bit more commitment. And so I do a lot of like outlining. I do lots and lots and lots of like, first I'll just kind of write down everything I know I want, even if I can't figure out how they're connected, just to kind of these like stray ideas that I have. And then once I have them written down, I can kind of like put them in order and figure out what the story is from that. And then kind of after refining, I do these like several different outlines. I do one step where I write it out as if I was like talking to you conversationally, so it's not like writing a book. It's still, the document only ends up being like maybe 2 pages or something like that. But that even helps me kind of fill in things that I don't even realize that I'm missing in the story. Like, well, how do I get from A to C? I'll have to fill in that B spot. So yeah, it's a lot of these sort of outlining steps until I feel pretty confident that I have the whole story broken down, and then I start thumbnailing in my sketchbook where I'm drawing these kind of rough versions of the comic pages in my sketchbook. And that's when, like, during these like outlining stages, I might throw in a line of dialogue or a joke if I think of something specific, but not really. It's once I start sketching, I can really kind of imagine the characters coming to life a bit more, and they start really doing their acting. that when a lot of times something that I think will maybe only take a page or two ends up taking 5 pages because actually I wanted to explore this kind of funny idea or this conversation between these two characters, and it kind of expands. And so what will often be me turning in an outline that's like, this looks like it's only going to be like 80 to 100 pages, will balloon up to like 150, 160 pages.
But I mean, I guess that's how it grows and evolves as you are telling the story. Like you said, like if you're chasing something, like you see something in this that it's like, no, I can unpeel this a little bit more. We could dig into this. I mean, and I guess if you're, it's an original graphic novel, you're the one writing and drawing it, so it's not like you're waiting on anybody else. You can just kind of dig into it and I guess expand upon it as much as needed. I'm sure that though, if Oni Press was expecting a 100-page graphic novel and you turned into like a 400-page tome, they might have an issue with it. But
yeah, right. Yeah, and I think there's even kind of some limitations. Like this one's about 160 pages, and that's getting towards the big side for like a middle grade graphic novel. But because it's just one single story and one thing, they were cool with it. But yeah, and now I know that about myself, so I'll kind of be aware that I'm gonna expand out, and my editor kind of expects that as well. So it's an ongoing evolution process for sure. But yeah, that's one of the cool things about working with Oni, is that they're pretty flexible in that way. They're not demanding a full script or anything like that.
Yeah, I guess what was that pitch process like to get into Oni? Knowing did you just like show them the? I'm picturing you ever see the Hudsucker proxy where he holds up like it's just you? Yeah, you holding up a picture of a ghost pig and you're like, you got it right. This is it.
Yeah, for kids. I had done the Merman series for them, and that was a much more intense pitching process where I had been serializing what ended up being the first book as mini comic issues myself, not worrying too much about pitching, but then they got wind of it because somebody recommended it to them, and so I was talking to them while I was doing those issues, and it was going back and forth a lot, and until they didn't completely commit until basically I was done with the first book. And then they were like, yes, but we want it in color because I was doing it in black and white. And that pitch process involved like a big pitch document that had like an outline for like the potential for 5 books, which I did end up doing, and character descriptions and things like that. And I did put that together for Ghost Hog as well, but it was maybe a little more casual because I knew them now at this point, and it was kind of like they were like, well, what are you thinking about working on next? And I was like, well, I'm not sure. And then when I committed in my head that I really wanted to do this Ghost Hog thing, I put together that pitch document and I showed it to them, and yeah, they were pretty much right on board immediately, which was great. I was not sure, I was a little nervous about it for those same reasons that we've talked about, but like they've been totally into it, which is cool. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it sounds like they're a pretty cool publisher across the board. So it's like seeing they seem like they're putting together a lot of interesting and cool stuff in there, and really for everybody. Yeah, which is great. Yeah, they've been very supportive of it, and it's been really exciting because Merman was a 5-book series. Like by the time I was on books like 3, 4, and 5. It was just kind of like, here's more of the same. And they would, announce the book and put a big ad in previews and stuff like that. But I feel like I'm seeing a bit more of a marketing push with this new book, just because it's a brand new thing, that it's kind of like, well, if you were on board with Merman through the first few books, of course you want the next few books. But now, since this is like a brand new thing, this is really our chance to kind of reach a whole new audience, which is exciting. Well, and I guess the hope too is that people that if they followed your journey along Merman over the course of 5 books, then they'll follow you along to Ghost Hog as well. Yeah, hopefully, yeah, and it's definitely in a similar tone. So I think people that like that would like Ghost Hog and vice versa. And you did mention it's 160 pages, but it's a brisk 160 pages. Like I think you really give a lot of room for the art to breathe and
and really kind of take in the world. So it's not like you're looking at something and you're like, oh, this is a novel that's written on this page. It's pretty spread out, and you get a lot of space in there to like really check out the world. So it's something that I think plays into the whole all ages aspect. So this is something like I could give my almost 6-year-old and he would probably dig into it and be able to read it without much trouble and not be overwhelmed by the way the book is set up.
Yeah. Where my books are, aimed specifically at middle grade, which is a little older, but then I've been told like your book is the first book that my kid has ever read on their own and things like that. So I definitely have a younger audience as well as an older audience. It's really cool. Like the term all ages isn't like used as much as it used to be. But I do like that term a lot. I understand why it's not super helpful when you're like, but what age? Like, should I put this in the bookstore? But like, I like that idea that it's something that could be enjoyed by everyone, and that's really what I do strive for.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, I feel like the term gets some weird like stigma attached to it too, where it's like it's all ages, it's more for kids, but it's not really. Like you're what I've noticed more and more, especially when you're dealing with something that is considered truly an all ages book, is that it works on those different levels. So someone as a kid will appreciate it differently than someone as an adult, and you'll see that. I mean, even going back and looking at some of the things that I like looking at something like Animaniacs years ago, like that was a show that like I liked it and it was a fun cartoon as a kid, but now, watching it as an adult, I'm like, man, all these things went way over my head, but this is brilliant, And
yeah, I had that experience recently with I got a set of the Mako's Modern Life. And that was one that I've always really loved, and I thought of it fondly, but I hadn't watched it since I was a kid. And it holds up. Like, I was basically like putting it in my DVD player with like my hands over my eyes, being like, okay, here we go, time to destroy my childhood. But like, it held up really well, and it was really funny. And I was catching a lot of those kinds of things where it's like, oh man, I wouldn't have known what that meant at all when I was a kid.
And that actually, Boom Studios had done a comic not that long ago for it, and that was it was the same kind of thing. Like, they didn't miss a beat with it. I'm like, man, this is still like really smart, and it just works on so many levels with this. It's perfect.
Yeah, the team on that was really great.
One other thing I wanted to make sure I ask you too, like, so the design for the characters in this kind of like world that you have. I mean, you have some things that are more abnormal, I guess you'd say, the forest spirits that are out here. Like, how did some of those things come together?
Yeah, so I had this idea that I wanted a sort of neutral kind of spirit that's not a ghost. It's not like necessarily a formerly dead creature, but it's not also like aligned with these sort of evil mountain demons. And so I came up with this idea of these like forest spirits, but I wanted them to be kind of different. And so one of them, Claude, is literally like a big clump of dirt and leaves and sticks and things. And so he's kind of like a personification of like the forest come to life, right? But as a kind of funny, cute little meatball type character. And then I think in just sketching, you play with contrasts. So I created this like tall, skinny, wispy character. And and to be honest, I don't completely know what he is. He's green, so that kind of is nature-like, and he kind of glows a little bit. And so he's a sort of more ephemeral spirit character. But like even in the book, they're kind of like, there's a small part where they're kind of like, what are we exactly? I don't know. Like we're really old ancient creatures, and by this point we've forgotten a lot of the details, but we're trying to like guide you so that you don't cause more trouble than you. Than you should, And I think
that's fine. So, like, you don't need to go into their origins as well, like to dig into it. It's just like, well, these are just they appear there to help. It's not quite like Ghosts of Christmas Past or something like that. It's just like, hey man, like you're new to the club. Welcome. We're part of the the whole paranormal part of this forest. Come on, we'll show you around a little bit.
Yeah, totally. And they provide a little bit of that sort of commentary character, comic relief type characters. I really ended up having a lot of affection for those two. Claude and Stanley are the forest spirits.
I love the idea that like even without Truff, like like I'm just imagining their adventures of just walking around the forest doing stuff because they seem to like just like stumble upon her and it's like, hey, like what's up? Like and like what were you guys doing before you came here? Like there's such like an odd couple to like be palling around, but like there's so many possibilities as to what and that comes back to what you said before, like. This is an entire world that you've made here. Like, this is something that it is a forest full of mystery, and even in between the Free Comic Book Day issue and the graphic novel itself, there's so much in here to just like pick apart, and you're like, what if like that's what like I think will speak so much to kids specifically. It's like, yeah, but what about this? What about this? What about that? And it's like, well, I don't know. Like, what do you think? Like, start that creative journey going, and I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, people can get really caught up in world building, and if that's like your jam, go for it. Good for you. But like I find that sometimes what that does is it gives you a years and years worth of like thinking about this creative world, but then no like real story comes of it, right? And so I prefer to do sort of the opposite, where I create the story and then I can create details of the world as needed, and then not necessarily completely explain them, partially because I don't even know the answer completely. And what that does is makes it maybe feel a little more real and a little more mysterious.
Yeah, and you don't need all that. That's the thing. I think we're seeing. I've seen more of a trend in that moving away from having to explain every single detail in that, because I think it kind of limits it. Like once you create all those rules and stuff, then you're kind of drawing yourself into a box, whereas like you have all these possibilities as to what it could be now, so it could be any of those things, and it kind of it becomes more of the interpretation of the reader and encourages more of that creativity, but also just people are smart, like we don't give them credit for how especially comic readers, I feel, because they have to do a little more work to understand what's going on in between those panels. In that gutter space something happens, and that's happening in your head. So when the reader is doing some extra work there, they're like finishing the book basically to an extent. So that I think comic readers are smarter than we give them credit for. So filling in those kind of gaps is probably okay, and it helps a lot.
Yeah, totally. And it can give me an opportunity to write further stories if I choose, and it can also give you the opportunity to like create your own stories in your imagination and stuff, which is exciting for me. I love that kind of like open-ended endings and things like that. That's kind of like, well, what do you think?
Yeah, well, and I mean, Ghost Hog does have an ending, so I don't want to make sure that people are aware. Like, it's not like it just really, and then we never know. Like, we never know what happened with it. But there is a beginning, middle, and end
definitely.
For this kind of story, and it's good. Like, it's a fun story that hits all ages. So I think that's that beacon of hope and creativity is such a perfect way to wrap up this chat here. But before I let you go, is there what are the best places to find you online as well?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Joey Weiser, and I have a pretty new Instagram, Joey Weiser Comics, where I've been kind of going through the sort of history of my work, posting all sorts of stuff lately. My Twitter is a bit more kind of all over the place, talking about movies I'm watching and my work and things like that. And joeyweiser.tumblr.com is where I post about my news. And but the big hub for like if you want to see my work and see information about it is my homepage, which you can find at tragic-planet.com. Tragic,
and then the symbol hyphen, not the word hyphen, right?
Oh yeah. It's that's the thing. It's tragicplanet.com, but I put a hyphen in it because it looks good, but it's difficult to describe.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And if you want to check out Ghost Hog, there's a Free Comic Book Day issue first. Where Free Comic Book Day is May 4th, 2019, and then right after that, so after you go to the comic book store, check out Ghost Hog. Like, this is great. I want to read more about this. May 8th, that following Wednesday, the 160-page graphic novel comes out. So. Pretty smart strategy there from you guys in Oni Press.
Yeah, it was great. I had nothing to do with that. When they told me that, I was like, that's perfect. That's excellent. Yeah, and around that time, the book's debuting at TCAF, so if you're in Toronto or in the Toronto area, I'll be at TCAF with the book, brand new, hot off the press. And I do want to stress that the Free Comic Book Day issue are two unique short stories that you wouldn't get from the book. So check them both out.
Yes, so that's also a great point, because I feel like too often publishers use Free Comic Book Day to just be like, oh, here's the first chapter, or here's a reprint or something like that. It is an entirely original story. It's set in the same world with those same characters, and you don't need to read one to read the other. You could dive into either one of them and pick it up pretty quickly. So very good setup there. And more Ghost Hog is good. So I'm all for it. So Joey, thank you very much for chatting with me today. This is fun. Like I'm always happy to chat with folks that are reaching. Since I'm a dad, I have to look for books like Ghost Hog to put in front of my kids. This is definitely one that I want to put in front of them. So that's it then for this episode of Funny Book Splatter. I have been James Ferguson with my guest Joey Weiser. You've been listening to Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorDNA.com. We have been bringing you the best in horror since 2002. If you like the show, please help me out by leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe to the show via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. I am always looking for new guests, so if you have a horror comic, I want to hear from you. I don't care if you're a seasoned pro or a first-timer. You can find me on Twitter as @JamesFerguson or via email at james@horrordna.com. In addition to comics, we cover movies, TV shows, books, and video games. We've got news, reviews, guest features, interviews, unboxing videos, and so much more. Check us out at HorrorDNA.com and @HorrorDNA on Twitter.